Right, there we go. Can you, well, the half a dozen people I can see on the edge of my screen, could you wave if you can see the slides? Thank you. Thank you. I see a few thumbs. Thank you very much. Right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Chris and Jude, for organising things and for asking me to come along and give this talk. A slight departure. I don't know whether any of you remember during the one of the really early Wivenhoe Watching Wildlife events, Glyn and Debs weren't able to join us, and they were up on the Outer Hebrides. And we had a live link up to them, and there was a gale blowing, and Glyn's hat flew away. I remember. Well, this is the kind of the nearest we get. As Chris said, it's not actually a presentation from the Hebrides, much as I wish it were. It's a presentation from lockdown on Bellevue Road. But so I'll just a quick introduction, and then I'll tell you what's going to happen. So I'm Greg. Myself and my wife Sarah have lived in Wivenhoe for 20 years, but for the last few years we've been spending increasing amount of time on the Isle of Coll up in the Hebrides, and I thought this would be a nice opportunity to share with you some of our experience and some of our excitement that we've felt in our time that we've spent up on the island. Now I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then there'll be room for questions. Use the chat. Don't wait till the end to ask a question. If there's anything that comes up that you'd like to ask, stick it in the chat as we're going along. And Chris has agreed to curate, I believe is the technical term, the questions in the chat as they come in, and he'll then ask them. So there'll be plenty of questions, but I can't promise there'll be any useful answers if you just leave it to me. But I'll get underway. So I'm going to say a little about Coll, what, where, and why, and then I'm going to use the 4 Bs to draw some tenuous links between the wildlife of Wivenhoe and the wildlife of Coll, and then I'll say a little bit about what Sarah and I are doing in regard to this, what Chris mentioned at the start, this Wildsmiths adventure. So I suppose. So the first bit, I'm going to talk about kind of what, why, and where. And I suppose where is actually the first question. Where is this island paradise? I should start with a map of the globe, really, shouldn't I? But I'll start with a map of Britain and Ireland. And I want you all to reach out at the screen and put your fingers on where you think the Isle of Coll might be. And I'm watching. I can see you doing it. That's right. Yes, that's spot on. That's excellent. Look, I can see. Yes, there, I could see a finger now has appeared. So many of you have pressed, it's appeared on my screen. That's where the Isle of Coll is, up there in they're called the Inner Hebrides. We'll just kind of zoom in a bit. So this is Scotland. You can see there the big rim of the Outer Hebrides up here. This is the Isle of Skye, and Coll is this tiny little island just tucked in here. We'll move on another one. And another one, and so Coll is one of a threesome of islands, really. It's kind of dominated by its big bullying brother, the Isle of Mull, which you can see in the middle of the screen there. This is the Isle of Mull, but Coll and its sister Tiree sit out about 8 or 10 miles off the outer edge of Mull, and the next thing you see if you keep going west is as you're passing Barra at the bottom end of the Outer Hebrides, you keep going and you'll finally hit Nova Scotia. So that's where Coll is. And to get to Coll, you could see the port of Oban here. You get the ferry out of Oban, and it takes about 2.5 hours. When I started, I should have apologised to you all because I'm conscious that we're clashing with Winter Watch, aren't we? Which is on at 8. So I recognise that at 8 o'clock, many of you might want to switch off and go over and watch Winter Watch, or you might want to catch up with it. But one of the things Winter Watch has been doing, which I really liked, is they've been doing a mindfulness moment, just a bit of sound and a chance to just kind of soak in some of the stillness and balm. So this is us floating gently up the Sound of Mull. With the Ardnamurchan Peninsula to our left, you can see as we look back from the end of the boat. So there's a little mindful moment as I move into. I'm now going to just take you through just a quick outline. So that's Coll, a lovely kind of fish-shaped island with the kind of the tail of the fish down here, and the kind of the head of the fish up there. I'm just going to talk you through the 4 main habitat types which the island is occupied by, or which occupy the island. The first and the main one, which you can see all down the centre of the island here, this kind of grey with lots of little black dots of ponds and lochans located throughout it. This is the moorland and bog area. There's a classic Coll view. It's not very high, not very mountainous, a low rolling landscape of what's called Louisian gneiss, a gnarled, rolling, crumbling rock that's been scattered by glaciers in the last ice age. So that's they're the kind of views. Beautiful lochans, reed fringe lochans with all sorts of rare plants and rare breeding birds on them. Lovely views when you get onto the higher parts of the island out towards the surrounding areas. And there's the only real land use, inverted commas, that this area has is a bit of rough grazing, a few highland coos and a few sheep around the place. But it's so wet that this cow its horn has been crumpled by the damp. But that gives you some idea of what the main landscapes of Coll look like. So that's the main bit, but no Hebridean island would be complete without its share of macha. And so the greeny bits along here and in here and all down here and all around there are the dunes, the sand dunes and the macha grasslands associated with them. And these are absolutely splendid, especially during May, June, July, when all the wildflowers are up. Dozens, I was going to say thousands, that's an exaggeration. 500 different species of wildflower have been recorded on Coll, many of them on this beautiful macha grassland. This is me last year leading a socially distanced walk, showing people some of the wildlife on the grass hill. Yeah, and there's another one with in the sand dunes there. But this beautiful species-rich grassland, often not rare wild plants, but quite common things, but just dozens and dozens of them growing cheek by jowl. It's really an exciting experience to see and a beautiful thing to see. Now, one of the things on the macha that I will talk about in a little while are some of the fantastic insects which are associated with the macha. And there's one in particular that I'm going to talk about. But the third thing, and it doesn't take up much of the landscape, just really this little bit of valley down here is given over to what might be considered more traditional agricultural practices. Very, very little arable land, but areas of grassland which are shut up, grazing stock is kept out, and they're cut for hay or for silage during the summer months, and that material is then used to feed the stock during the winter time. So just to give you some idea, here's a view from the top of one of the sand dunes down. It's one of the rocky promontories down across. You could see one of the big farms there, and there's another farm off to the in here, and another farm off to the right there. But that's a view. You can see it's very rough. It's certainly not the sort of tidy agriculture that we're familiar with. And indeed, most of the agricultural land is actually owned by the RSPB and farmed with nature in mind all the time. And again, I'll talk about one of the key species that makes use of this area. One thing is I'm not going to talk about are the geese that come here to winter, just as we have Brent geese coming here to the Essex coast all the way from northern Russia to spend the winter here. And they become a really integral part of our experience of being in Wivenhoe during the winter. Well, similarly, the barnacle geese that come down from Greenland and spend their winter down on the grazed farmland areas of Coll are a kind of a great feature of the island. There's also some interesting geese for the twitchers. There's a small party of snow geese that spend much of the well, they spend all the year there actually, but more about them if anyone wants to ask me a question. So that's the third main habitat, the farmland area. And then finally, the fourth I wanted to talk about is the thing that dominates this map, this satellite photograph, the sea and the shoreline all around it. Fantastic place, beautiful. You can imagine Hebridean islands, white sand beaches, deep blue seas, beautiful rocky shores, interesting geological features like this causeway running out, a dike, basalt dike running out into the sea. lovely streams cutting through the shore, and this is a key area for otters on the island. In that image there, otters like fresh water, even though they spend in Scotland they spend a lot of their time in the sea and they feed mostly in the sea, but they like to have fresh water to clean themselves in after they've been out in the sea. So a stream running across a beach like this is a perfect place to see otters on Coll. There are a few bits of cliff, and you can see that the dots on this final picture are shags, again socially distanced along the cliff face there. But there are some seabirds that breed on the island. But again, there's a more exciting thing that I want to talk about later that lives in the seas around Coll. So that's a quick introduction to the islands. Any questions inspired by that? Get onto the chat and type them. Next, I'm going to pick up these 4 Bs, one associated with each of those 4 main habitats on the island. Now, the first thing I was going to talk, I'm going to talk about botany, and I'm going to try and draw some parallels between our wildlife and what's special, the things we've got excited about here in Essex, and similar exciting things on Coll. So one of the key features of the Essex estuaries is this plant, the hog's fennel. Very rare nationally, only really occurs on the Essex coast and on the Kent coast. It's the home to a really rare moth, which again, because it specialises on only this plant, the Fisher's estuarine moth, a really key feature of our wildlife experience here in Essex. But it's not. Although it's very rare at a national scale in Essex, there's now quite a lot of it. Not just up in Hamford Water where this picture was taken, but through conservation work it's now been re-established at a number of sites not far from us down towards Alsford Creek. There's been a reintroduction as well to try to help this rare plant, but also to help the rare moth that makes use of it. So so that's the hog's fennel. What's the equivalent plant? Equivalent is a dangerous word, but my parallel species on Coll is a thing called pipewort. Again, a very rare plant. It only grows in maybe half a dozen locations in Britain and Ireland. A really rare plant, but one that's really close to my heart. Now, it's really difficult to describe it. So, and I guess for many of you, you're very unlikely to have the experience of seeing this plant in the flesh. So I'm going to just do a little mind experiment with you, just so you get us an idea. So what you've got to do is picture the blue licorice allsorts and your mum's knitting needles. Get as many blue licorice allsorts as you can and stick one on the end of each of your mum's knitting needles. Then go and scatter them at jaunty angles in the nearest shallow water. And there you get, that's the effect that you're looking for. So if you don't get to see pipewort, but you feel you've missed out in life, then just follow that little experiment and you'll be able to see. And there really are a fantastically interesting plant, as I say, enormously rare in Western Europe. Last year, I took a long walk out onto that northern moorland area that I showed you on the satellite photograph. And the first loch that we came to, Lochen really, there were 2 or 3 pipewort plants, and I saw them. They're very distinctive, as you can see, and so I immediately recognized what they were. I was very excited. The person I was with was very proud because she took me to see them, and she knew she'd been there before. And so I got really excited, down on my hands and knees, lots of photographs, lots of sketches and close-up photos, and assessing the other plants growing with them. And I made out, yes, there were 3 plants. I was very excited. I then went round the corner as we skirted the edge of the Lochen, and oh look, there are another 4 or 5 there. Excellent. I'll make a note of that. And then oh gosh, there's a big patch here. By the time I'd got to 500 individuals, I just wrote lots and lots of pipewort in this loch. And then we moved on to the next loch, and same again, oodles of the stuff sticking out everywhere. But it's only restricted to half a dozen lochens on the island, and it's been the same half a dozen lochens for a year and a half, for a century and a half since they were first discovered. So it's not very mobile. It's doing fine, but it's not spreading at all. So that's my great excitement of the pipewort. So that's my botanical connection. I thought then, I was thinking one of the other distinctive features of our wildlife here in Wivenhoe is the stag beetle. It's big, obvious, it's got an interesting life cycle, it's nationally scarce but locally abundant. Now the problem, again, it's not an equivalent, but my parallel on Coll is a species called the oil beetle. This is the short-necked oil beetle. Again, it's quite a striking beetle. It's very rare. This occurs on the Maca. It's corpulent, as you can see. Let me show you another couple of photographs. A corpulent thing, described once to me as like a portly gentleman who has outgrown his waistcoat, which you could see there, absolutely stuffed. This one on the right is a female stuffed full of eggs. Now, in the 1940s, it was assumed that this species was extinct in the British Isles. And then in 2006, a small population was discovered on the Devon coast. And then in 2008, in a country where they had never been seen before, a population was discovered on the Isle of Coll. But bizarrely and remarkably, they were found over the next 10 years to be very well established across Coll. All the Maca grasslands had them. And Sarah and I have been lucky enough to be involved in some surveys for them. And indeed, they're very easy. The first time we ever went to Coll, we were wild camping in the dunes at the back of a beach. And I came across this small, fat, very distinctive looking beetle. I didn't know anything about it. I sort of took a couple of photographs and thought, I don't know what this is. And when we got to the community centre the next day, there was a big display panel up all about the short-necked oil beetle, this enormous rarity that only occurred on Coll and in one place on Devon. And I said, Sarah, look, it's that beetle we found the other day. So very, very exciting thing to have here. Now, the most amazing thing about this beetle is its life cycle. I'm going to simplify, but basically all beetles have 3 stages in their life. They're an egg, they're a larva or a grub, and they're an adult. Now, what the oil beetle has done, the oil beetle has added an extra stage in that sequence. And this is because you need to understand something about how it lives. So the grub stage, bear in mind the grub stage or the larval stage of an insect is the one that does all the eating. That's the one that builds up the energy to create the adult, which then goes off and breeds. So, and the place that the oil beetle gets its nutrients from is the nests of solitary bees. Solitary flower bees of the Colletes species or genus, and the way they get into the nest of a flower bee is by this extra stage that they've developed. So from the egg comes a little creature like an ant, whose sole job is running and jumping, and it runs up the nearest wildflower and in the Maca and sits on top of the wildflower waiting for a bee of the right species to come along and land on the flower, and then it jumps and hangs on for dear life to the bee, nuzzles down in its fur, gets carried back to the bee's nest, jumps off, transforms into a more traditional larva or grub of a beetle, and proceeds to consume the food provisions which have been stored by the bee in the nest for its own eggs and young. Fascinating, and then emerges from the nest gorged and stuffed, pupates then into an adult, flies around, and the whole doesn't fly around. Very important, flightless. Oil beetles are flightless. Runs around, and lays some eggs, and the whole sequence begins again in another year. So fascinating and wonderful, really interesting creature. So the next thing I wanted to do, now I'm going to maintain that there is a very strong connection between these next two species, but I'm going to accept that you may not quite buy it from their songs. Let's just see if you could tell me what this first one is that's singing. And the second. Now, the reason I say these two, which are very different songsters, have got a lot in common is they're both eagerly awaited in spring. They're the sign of spring. They're long-range migrants coming from sub-Saharan Africa. They are a kind of a feature of the area. They both sing day and night. They're both quite dowdy to look at, and they both represent the individuals who are around today for the nightingale here in Wivenhoe and the corncrake up on the Isle of Coll. They are the vestiges of a once widespread populations which had declined by huge amount, such that now we just have small remnant vestiges of these populations in the nightingale and the corncrake. So that was going to be my little thing. So I think the corncrake, there are people who look at a nightingale picture and say it's a very beautiful bird, but I think the corncrake does do it for me. I think it's lovely. It's a small, it's a landrail. It's a bit like a moorhen, but this beautiful grey and honeyed, peachy coloured. It's perfectly camouflaged. Now, the other thing that they both have in common, nightingale and corncrake, is they're both very difficult to see. You can hear them, you know they're there, but they're very, very difficult to see and take photographs of. On one occasion, Sarah and I were sat on the viewing platform at the RSPB Reserve on Coll, and there were corncrakes singing all around us, but we hadn't seen a single one. And we were beginning to despair, but a couple came along on a pair of bikes, and they kind of come and joined us and said, how are you getting on? And we said, well, we can hear corncrakes all around, but we haven't seen, oh, wait, look. And two corncrakes came out into a gap right in front of us and marched up and down, preened a bit. One of them did the craking, and then they snuck off back into the vegetation. And this couple turned to each other and said, well, they were good, weren't they? I've never seen one of them before. Let's go and get a cup of tea. And we said, no, you can't do that. You've got to sit here for 3 hours waiting for the corncrake to appear. You've got to hear that. There's a call in the background. That's the distinctive sound of a corncrake Sarah's just presented. So let me move on now. My final parallels, so that was in the farmland area. My final parallels are in the seas. Now, there's something here that you may not know about the Essex coast, and that is that the Essex coast holds the record for the smallest rod-caught sea fish ever caught in the United Kingdom. Was caught in the Chalmer Canal back in the 1980s. And it weighed, wait for it, 1 gram. And it was a common goby, probably smaller than this one, but caught on a rod and line, a common goby. In Coll, they have the largest fish in UK waters, the basking shark. Now if the common goby weighs 1 gram, I think the basking shark is probably about 5 million grams. They're usually 5 to 6 tons. About 7 to 10 meters long. The most fantastic piece of wildlife I think I've ever experienced. Really, really exciting to see. They're plankton feeders, filter feeders, those huge mouths. They just swim along, hoovering up the contents of the ocean as they go. They're very strong, but very slow and gentle. They were once hunted to near extinction up until, and they were still fished for in kind of whaling boats, essentially, up until the 1980s. And they were caught in huge numbers, and there used to be huge numbers in the North Atlantic and Northeast Atlantic, where we are now, and the Hebridean Sea was a particular place for them. But they were hunted for their oil. They're not very nutritious to eat, but about a quarter of the mass of a basking shark is made up of its liver, and the oil in its liver, a thing called squalene, is used, or was used in the past, as an industrial lubricant to burn in lamps and in cosmetics. So had a wide range of uses. The reason they stopped fishing for it was not because it became rare, not because some protection was added to it, but simply because the price of shark oil fell through the floor and it stopped being economic, and the fishers who were doing it turned their attention to other species like herring and things which had brought a better return on their investment. However, I'm pleased to say that they are now a protected species. They're protected globally. The basking shark is protected in all waters where it occurs. The only two countries that allow fishing for it still are Japan and China. They have to travel a long way to locate them. And annoyingly, that huge fin, let me show you this photograph. This gives you a sense of the scale of the thing. These are photographs courtesy of Basking Shark Scotland, which shows that, so that fin is used still, I'm sorry to say, in shark fin soup, and also as a kind of as an alternative medicine, as part of a kind of annoyingly, if you Google it, you can, the first thing that comes up if you Google basking shark oil is, oh yeah, you can buy it $6 a tablet on Amazon, which I find absolutely outrageous. However, enough of that. The exciting thing is that they do have a commercial role now, in that they attract enormous numbers of tourists to Scotland. There's a company called Basking Shark Scotland, which runs tours. You can see one of their folk on their boats up there. And they go out in a very organised way in order to give people the opportunity to experience these sharks close up. They are fantastic. Sarah and I have seen several of them last year when we were up on Coll. A very exciting thing to see. I won't keep going on about them, but they are brilliant. One of the best things, let me just tell you, one of the best things that happened in 2020, maybe the only good thing that happened in the whole of 2020, was in December, when the Scottish government announced that the Hebridean Sea was being made a marine protected area for basking sharks and minke whales. And if they put the force of other legislation behind that in order to ensure that pressures on these species are properly managed, then that's going to be really great. And as I say, the numbers, hundreds and hundreds of sharks are being seen now in the last couple of years, compared with just single digit numbers being seen 20 or 30 years ago. So really exciting recovery, if that's what it is. So that's the basking shark. None of those in the off the Essex coast, I'm sorry to say. But so finally, let me just say a little bit about what we've been doing, what this Wildsmith thing is all about. So inspired by Wivenhoe Watching Wildlife, and not wanting to drift into kind of retirement and the next phase of our lives without having one last kind of run at it. Sarah and I, a couple of years ago, set up a business called Wildsmiths to run a kind of a wildlife watching and walking business up on Coll. The idea being to share with people our knowledge of wildlife, to share our enthusiasm and excitement for it, to get people inspired, help them understand a little more about the wildlife around them, and thereby, we hope, help both the local community and visitors to the island to understand, value, and help to protect it. So part of our great plan was come 2019, the end of 2019, I gave up my job and we were all ready to go. We spent the winter getting ready to go up to Coll to run our new business. Of course, we all know what happened in 2020. We did manage to get up there for a couple of months, as I've said, and that was fantastic. We saw a whole load of fantastic wildlife, but more importantly, we were able to lead a lot of walks, especially for people from the local community, and it was great to kind of share with them, and I opened the door to some of this with them. So our plan is we're going to be going back as soon as circumstances allow, and we'll then be running the business, leading wildlife walks, helping people to see otters and basking sharks and corncrakes and oil beetles, and you can follow our adventures on our website, where I'll be blogging regularly, or if you're on social media, then Wildsmiths Coll is the handle to find us on Facebook and Twitter. And I think I'll stop there with just 5 minutes left if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. That's outstanding, wonderful. Taste buds suitably tickled. We're looking forward to going up there in late summer this year.